Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this afternoon's session on the topic of frictionless HR, elevating user experience in SAP SuccessFactors with SAP Business Technology Platform. My name is John Clifford. I'm the Group Marketing Director for Gavdi Group and have been responsible, I suppose, for hosting and facilitating this event. We are mindful of the fact that we are expecting quite a large audience. This is definitely a very, very hot topic, I think, not alone within SAP, but very much so, I think, towards HR and what's relevant today is SAP SuccessFactors. Just before we get things underway, I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping, if that's okay with everyone. I am mindful of everyone's time. This afternoon's session will be recorded, and we will share a recording with all of you who attend today. We're happy to do that. We also try and make these sessions as interactive and I guess as engaging as possible. You will notice on your panel at the top there is a Q&A, chat functionality. If you do have questions, please feel free to submit them on the chat. We will endeavour to get through to answering as many questions as we can, but it is dependent, I guess, on how far we go into this. But regardless, we will follow up with you. And on that note, I'm just going to straight into the agenda and do a brief introduction also, or ask my two colleagues and participants perhaps maybe to do a brief introduction to who they are and what they do. So if I could go to the next slide, we'll just have a look at the agenda. So we'll do a quick intro into our two speakers today, and we'll talk about the origin of friction, the power of synergy. I think this is what we all want to learn a little bit more about. And part of that is connecting systems. We'll talk then on to the next point will be about user adoption and I suppose enhancing that user experience. Answering questions beyond the FTE, connecting the dots in the process. Talk a little bit then about hyper-automation with artificial intelligence. And as I said, then we'll do a brief Q&A session at the end. So this is, I suppose, what I would describe as a truly global event in the sense that I'm joined by my colleague, Henrik Jarlskov. Henrik is our Chief Technology Officer here at Gavdi Group, based out of Denmark. And also delighted to be joined by Mick Collins. Mick is sitting in the States very early this morning, but we're delighted to have him participate on this session as well. I might ask you, Mick, if you wouldn't mind, good morning again, to maybe just give our attendees and registrants a brief intro of who you are and what you do, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Absolutely. So yes, good morning, good afternoon. So as John mentioned, my name is Mick Collins. I'm Vice President of Go-to-Market here at SAP SuccessFactors. My role is to hopefully connect our products to our customers and explain what our products are intended to do for you. And that's really part of the webinar here today. In terms of my solution areas, I cover BTP, Business Data Cloud, our new people intelligence application that is coming out next month, and also SAP SuccessFactors Enterprise Service Management. So it's quite a diverse portfolio of solutions, but I'm delighted to be here and thank you for inviting me to talk today about BTP.
Thank you, Mick. And over to you, Henrik. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And my name is Henrik Jarlskov, and I've been CTO at Gavdi Group for a long time, focusing mainly on the areas that are not on SAP shelves. So what Mick is sort of missing that the customers need to get a full suite of what they need. And on top of that, I do a lot of advisory and inspiration, and I will try to do that a bit today on challenging the status quo of where you might be with your HR solutions.
Thanks, Henrik. So let's get things underway. I'm going to hand it back to Mick, and Mick is going to talk a little bit more, I suppose, about SAP Business Technology Platform and how they innovate around SAP SuccessFactors. So over to you, Mick.
Thank you. So really the first point here today is to expand the notion of what it means to be an SAP SuccessFactors customer. On one hand, we have native innovation. You'll see that in the first box here on the left-hand side. So Employee Central, payroll, the investments we're making in AI, Talent Intelligence Hub, select acquisitions like Smart Recruiters come into the portfolio as well, and we deliver that to all of our customers inside of the suite. Secondly, we have our ecosystem, over 350 applications, extensions to SuccessFactors that are in the SAP store. So these are productized solutions that extend different parts of the SAP SuccessFactors suite that you can purchase within the store itself. And then thirdly, we have really what we're talking about here, which is limitless innovation. I love the term, the frictionless HR organization, where we can use SAP's Business Technology Platform to solve for unique cases, something that may be very specific to your own organization that maybe no other organization in the world does when it comes to HR and talent management. Business Technology Platform can help to solve for that. And I'll provide some use cases in just a moment. I know that'll be part of the conversation here today, but it really is about cloud without compromise. If you're an on-premise customer, for example, you can use the Business Technology Platform to move those customizations into the cloud. And you can do so, as you see on this page, through a couple of different ways. So Business Technology Platform is something we use here at SuccessFactors. Our Work Zone solution, for example, is built upon the Business Technology Platform. But there's three main capabilities here. So the first on the left-hand side is integrations. HR is probably one of the more diverse functions, organisms within the organization. The people data that you hold touches many different systems, both SuccessFactors, SAP, third-party systems, government organizations, regulatory bodies. The need to ensure that data is transferred securely and without disruption is something that is facilitated by SAP Integration Suite. And that's probably the part of BTP that most of our SuccessFactors customers first experience when they move into the SuccessFactors community. They need to ensure that that backbone of talent management is adequately provided for, and that is what SAP Integration Suite does. Then we have SAP Build. Probably the most common topic in terms of customer use cases is SAP Build. So here we're talking about, for example, building a new experience for an employee group or a particular role. So perhaps there's a unique need, a communication you need to encourage with your employees that is very specific to your organization. That's where SAP Build comes into play. And I'll talk about that in just a moment in terms of different ways in which you can access it. And then thirdly, on the right-hand side, process automation. HR, of course, is very process-driven. Recruiting, performance, compensation, all based around workflow. And in many cases, our customers come to us and say, these processes are manual. They require multiple disconnected systems. Approvals require different stakeholders to be involved in the process. It is disruptive to our employees. It's also disruptive to HR efficiency. And the more we can automate these processes, the more we improve HR efficiency and, frankly, deliver a better employee experience. So integrations, build, process automation, really three of the major capabilities that we see our HR customers using with SAP Business Technology Platform. We're also making it easier for you to acquire licenses and begin to use some of these capabilities. So in May, we released a new package for organizations that are coming into our family and purchasing Employee Central and also want to purchase time and EC payroll as well. There is a new package available to those customers. It also includes SAP Build licenses. So base user licenses, developer licenses, runtime capacity, all included in that package, really is a way to get started, to dip your toe in the water when it comes to using SAP Business Technology Platform. So again, maybe you have a specific use case. You want to build an extension. You want to build a customer-facing application or an employee-facing application. These starter licenses are something you can use to get started on that journey. So this new core HR package is available today for net new organizations coming into SAP SuccessFactors. And my final point today is to share some examples of these kinds of use cases. We will have more at SAP Connect and Success Connect next month. Hopefully you can join us in Las Vegas. If not, there is the virtual show that I will encourage you to sign up for. We do have a session on SAP Build specifically, including two of our marquee customers talking about how they use Build to extend their investment in SuccessFactors. But as you can see on this page, the use cases for BTP are fairly diverse. And again, I think it comes back to identifying unique processes or activities that you think are not performing well enough in terms of delivering the optimal employee experience, and then looking at different BTP capabilities to see how can I integrate this data, how can I make this data more readily available to my employees, how can I automate different processes. So we're excited about the Business Technology Platform. We're seeing thousands of our HR customers start to use it, whether they've purchased it themselves or they've acquired it from IT. And it does give HR an opportunity to build that frictionless organization, as John and Henrik are talking about here. So with that, I'm going to turn to Henrik and we'll get into the meat of the material here today.
Thank you, Mick.
Thank you, Mick. Yeah, so I want to start with the origin of friction, because being interested in the systems and the platforms, this is one thing, but what's the end? They're the end goal and they're the tools. We want to start a bit looking at where the friction comes from. And I want to start with the origin of this, which is the assumption that we all make when we start implementing SuccessFactors or any other system for that matter. We start on a base of incorrect assumptions, and this trickles down to being the friction that the end user perceives. One of the worst ones is that we actually care about the system that we're implementing. So when you finally get that approval for implementing something like SuccessFactors, we come with the assumption that because for us, the work in HR, this is a so much better system, it's so much more powerful, it's so much more user-friendly, that everyone will be introducing to it in the organization is going to love it. And that assumption typically falls back on us when we then see the user adoption. Because let's be frank, if we look at this from the outside in, people don't really care that much about HR if you're not working in HR. It's just a system where you need to do your leave request, or where you need to report in sick, or where you need to do time registration, or you need to report contact information, and you hopefully get your salary that's normally correct. If we come with the assumption that everyone's just going to love the system and use it, then we're going to fail when it comes to user adoption, because we're not seeing the system as the end user will. The second one, which are equally contributed to this part, is that we think in HR that everyone loves to fill in master data and forms. But no one wakes up one morning wanting to fill in a hire form. So no matter how many fields you find in there, no one's going to enjoy filling it out. And we in HR, we love to collect data. I think the EU GDPR has made it slightly more evaluating whether we should have those data in it and what we should do with them. But we still collect a lot of data, and we have the idea that we can just push this to the end user to fill it in. But most of the fields that we're asking them to fill in, they don't really understand the difference at the different level that we put it in. What's the difference between the job level, job function, and job description compared to the position? That's HR speak. And the more fields you have, the more is the data that, the more is the risk that the data you'll get is incorrect or inconsistent at best, which will become an issue when we talk about AI later on. The last of the typical frictions is that we also make the general assumption that all the personas that we're going to push the solution to are the same and they work in the same way as they do for this people that set up the system. And you'll typically see this because it's a project done by white collars in a white collar environment. But seeing how recruitment works on the factory floor, or how reporting in sick when you're a traveling salesperson, if you don't have that in mind when you look at how you're utilizing the system, will end up creating friction for the end user that has to conduct the tasks. So we want to look at what sort of wrong assumptions come into play where we want to create a great user experience. And the great user experience doesn't come from what you've taken off the shelf. It comes from the insight you have into the different types of people and end users you have working in your company. So if we take a look at what you typically start with, well, you typically start with SuccessFactors implemented, right? And SuccessFactors out of the box comes with a lot of benefits that you could also push as part of the business case, right? It's a full suite and it's continuously updated and fully managed by SAP. So you sort of get a system as a service out there, right? You don't have to care about all those things, but at the same time, you get best practice cooked in. And then we have the assumption that best practice will work for all. Well, that's just the general lowest level, so to speak. It doesn't mean that it will fit you for every process that's in the system, of course. However, it also comes with a lot of other customers having used this for a long time, so it's proven. So you get a good starting box. And the point I'm trying to make is that it's just a starting box. So what you then do when you combine this with a platform of flexibility, in this case, the SAP Business Technology Platform, then you get the chance to look at what you had out of the box and take the best practices, but also see into where doesn't the best practice fit you, or where doesn't it create the user adoption, or where does it create friction for your end user? And you can typically see the derived effect of this when you see you suddenly have bad data or missing data, inconsistent data, or you have a slow response time. If I've seen customers celebrate that they can do a recruitment in less than 45 days, which isn't really a success parameter I would go for. So it always comes down to, do you have a good starting point, and then do you understand your end user? Because what we do with the Business Technology Platform is that we add a whole set of tools that you can augment and improve the experience that you get with your SuccessFactors system. And I want to dive into 5 of the main parts, which you can also see here, on what sort of aspect they add to removing the friction. And we start with one thing that Mick also went into, which is the integration part. And why I want to talk about integrations is because HR is not an island. You don't just buy and provision a system from SAP and then it just works out of the box, because even though it's in the cloud, data doesn't just flow between systems. And we want to make sure that the data that we do collect is utilized in the right way. So if we go down, if we don't have the data distributed properly, the right data, of course, distributed using integrations, then we have inconsistent data in our landscape. And we use the HR data in a lot of places, not just for security or for authorizations, but also for your main systems like SAP S/4HANA, right? You need the employee, you need the users, and you need the right ones. And you want to make sure that the user that's no longer in the system in SuccessFactors is also reflected in your perhaps very restricted system, that they're also restricted there with the role-based permission. So if you don't have integration scenarios that are put in place, then your whole system landscape becomes inconsistent. And the worst thing here you can find is the outdated data. So inconsistent data makes you do poor decisions, but outdated data is where you suddenly have security issues, right? If users have access to something where they should no longer have access, or if you have retented data that shouldn't be there anymore. And that's also where you need to have a good integration strategy to make sure that what sort of data should you keep and who's the master of those data. If you end up in a scenario where you have multiple sources of truth because you end up with the inconsistent, then forget about getting answers out of your reporting, getting answers out of any sort of AI training you're going to have, because the data there becomes the key. And then you end up with a discussion of what sort of conclusions can you have when you don't really have the foundation of this. And it's easier said than done, because anyone who's worked with HR data for a while knows that HR data are complex, especially when you're talking about effectively dated data. Integrating effectively dated data into a system that doesn't support this is a massive undertaking. So you have to start with finding out where's your HR data needed so that you can make the right decision. That starts with having a great integration strategy. That's also typically where people start in BTP. The second thing, however, is even more interesting, because that's where we start to see people understanding the users. Because out of the box, you get a lot of visualizations from the applications that come in the SuccessFactors suite. But at the same time, they might not exactly fill every persona you have. Is the manager exactly for manager self-service? Well, that pretty much depends whether you're talking of a person who's responsible for the floor of your production, or whether it's a senior vice president. They come with very different backgrounds, different understanding. And when we then talk to customers about the user adoption with user experience, we typically get the the assumption that, well, user experience is just about mobile enabling the applications. If you're talking about strategic reporting, we wouldn't do that on a mobile device. I've never met a payroll administrator asking to get a mobile experience on running payroll. No, it's about much more than this. And this is where you need to understand your end user again, because when you want to create a great user experience, you have to start with the context. So what do they understand? Which sort of wording do they understand? Where are they conducting the process? Are they doing it on the factory floor with a mobile device or a tablet? Or are they using an assistant, Copilot, Joule, or something else? What is the relevance for them? You have to understand which part of the process do you actually want them involved with. I think the hire form is a great example of, let's collect every field we have in a single form and then have somebody random type it in. You have to split it up and finding out exactly who do you want to ask what at what point in the process. And then you have to think about what are the defaulted data. And the defaulted data might sound easy, but that actually requires you to understand not just what location people are in or what department, but even more importantly, what do they know and what are they trying to achieve? Because if you know that, then you can default a lot more data that they don't have to fill in. This is sort of the best AI scenario you can get when you prevent people from filling out fields that could potentially be incorrect. You're saving them time, but you're also creating much more consistent data at the same time. So if you want to create like a great user experience, then you have to think about every step of the process. Is the process step you're in now, does the user experience show you what you need to know, or do you need to go somewhere else to see it? You typically see this when people opening another session, right? Or more realistically, downloading things into Excel and then doing it themselves. Not because there's something wrong with Excel. Excel is just the expression power that people get because they feel that they can move things around and do all those incorrect calculations that they do according to Gartner. And at the same time, you have to think about not just that you're showing the right things, but are you showing it in a way that the end user understands? You can use wording or labeling in the wrong way, and then they wouldn't even understand what you're asking, right? So all this is the starting point of creating a good user experience. Then we add a lot of layers on top. The power of personas, being able to understand what sort of different people, end users you have involved, and therefore directing your user experience to these people based on where they are, how they're working. You have so many options, not just creating mobile experience, but also creating new sort of reports, dashboards, depending on what questions you want answered. And the underlying key to this is understanding the data that goes into the system and equally the data that goes out of it. And once you have that in place, then you can start to look at what everyone's asking for, because one core aspect of doing frictionless is to remove the interaction altogether. But that, of course, comes with automation, right? And there's a lot of services on BTP that you can utilize as tools for helping. But there's one tool that we keep getting back to because it fits especially the HR scenario so well. That's the build process automation. Most people know it because it contains the workflow engine and the business rules engine. The reason why that's such a powerful tool is that it creates a visual way to actually map out your business process. And when you do this together with your end users, not just your consultants in doing it in a theoretical way, but you're actually your end users, then you find out how many different paths you have. This whole idea of one process to rule them all it will quickly fall apart because that typically never works in a global company. But here you have a chance to capture those. You have a chance, once you've captured them, to automate them. And the impact of this is extremely powerful. So first of all, because it's cross-system processes. And for those of you who work in SuccessFactors, you know that there's a workflow engine in SuccessFactors. But if you hover up a bit higher in the system landscape and you have multiple SAP solutions running and even non-SAP solutions like ServiceNow, you'll find that almost all of them have a workflow engine, which is great. I mean, workflow engines are great. You'll have one in SAP Concur, SAP S/4HANA, Hybris, Stygia, Qualtrics, all those solutions. The problem is that what you're really asking your managers and your employees to do is to log in to 18 different places every day and checking what sort of workflow they have for approval or rejection. And this is where the workflow engine on BTP becomes an extremely powerful engine, because it actually connects to all of these and makes a cross-system process. It hooks into the workflows in SuccessFactors and Concur, and then allows you to connect these. It's fully adaptable. Unlike those who've worked in the old ECC system, you can actually create the user experience. Means that when you're asking someone to make a decision in a step, you can create the visualization on top of what they need, so they have the context. You can create the graphs, the data insights, so that they basically need to make a decision and have the data that they need. At the same time, you can also connect everything into one inbox. That's of course extremely powerful. But this is also a place where you have a chance to add AI. So if you look at the data and this sort of decision always ends up in 99.5% certainty, this choice, well, then automate it, because then you're again removing friction. The underlying parameter for this, of course, again becomes the data. And when I talk to most SuccessFactors customers, this becomes like the thorn in the thigh, right? Because we always talk about reporting data, and typically the first thing we start is the FTE, right? Do you know how many full-time employees you have? Well, there's a lot more questions you should be asking, and you should be able to answer. And that's where we need to go from being we're admins of the HR system to we're actually creating impact on the organization utilizing the HR system. And the bottom line of this is that if you don't have data at good quality, you really have an issue on how to create the impact. And let's dive into a bit on how that is, because when I then talk to customers, how many questions you can actually ask, you can sort of see the blank faces, which is what you should be asking if you want to optimize your operation and you want to remove the friction, right? So a good example is going into recruitment, saying that, okay, so you are hiring someone in recruitment. That means it must be going well. Which candidates are you losing, and when and why are you losing them? Can you answer this? Because otherwise you don't know whether you're getting the leftovers all the time, which will have an impact on your business processing very soon. At the same time, and this is coming up in Europe really at the moment, right, with the whole equal pay and probably more coming, right? Are you then providing the same opportunity to all your employees? It makes little sense to look at if you're paying the same amount for people in the same positions, if the only one getting into the high paid positions are only one type of gender, for example, then you're not offering the same opportunity. But can you answer this if someone came asking? Or will you try to create some ad hoc reporting and then hopefully be able to answer? Do you have the data? And if you don't do that, then how are you going to optimize this? How are you going to say that you're a fair business, right? Which managers perform well? Who does a good job? Who should you be flagging and having a talk to so that they can either develop or you can protect the employees associated with them? Do you discover these high potential already during recruitment, or do they need to be working for you for 5 years before you have a chance to spot a high potential? When you've spotted them, can you spot the traces to someone similar when you have them in recruitment? These are sort of the questions that we should be able to address if we want to utilize the system. So I typically ask them, so how long does it take to be hired in this? And then we have a talk about how much they've simplified the hiring form. There's a lot of stuff before and after. And if you look at it from the end user's perspective, they don't really care. I've seen many end users being, oh yeah, now you came from a candidate, right, into an onboarding, and then you later become an employee. That's not how the candidate sees it. They see themselves as an employee, and this weird split we have between silos or modules is something that shouldn't be reflected in your data. You should be able to see how people are progressing in your system, and you should be able to discover these trends and then act on them, right? Retention is something that at least has received a lot of attention due to GDPR. But if you want to go into, let's say, the last pillar, which everyone is so hypely focused about at the moment, then being able to answer questions based on the data is key to this. And the real issue is that it takes a long time from when you spot an area where you want to have the data until you actually have enough data to make decisions. So you can't make an automated response for an agent based on that you've had 3 workflows do this. You need a lot of data, meaning that the sooner you start collecting the data you want to have impact on, the sooner you'll have a chance to automate things and improve it, right? The underlying concept here, of course, is data-driven HR, where we want to make sure that we have the impactful data. And once we have that, then we can start to discover trends and we start to act on them before they have an impact. But if you're aren't asking those questions, just assuming that they are in the system, then you run into an issue. And should you have those data, then we can talk about the last and perhaps most hyped topic I've had since doing my master's in it, which is artificial intelligence, right? Also known by other words as hyper-automation. So what we're chasing, and I would bet that 99% of you has been asked by upper management to look into AI, where they're probably meant to say generative AI, because what everyone in the field is chasing is that experience that people felt, that empowerment when they started playing around with the original version of ChatGPT, and a whole new world opened up. No one really took the perspective to look into, does this actually make sense in an enterprise world where most is transaction and not generating new data? We don't generate new employees, we capture the existing ones instead. How does that fit in? So we actually, for once, don't start with the business case, we start with the tool dictated from our upper management. You should do something about AI, and then everyone is scrambling to find business cases where it actually makes sense to utilize this tool. And the starting point here is, do you actually have the data to train something? Because otherwise, you should start somewhere else. What I didn't typically see, this has been a request for 95% of my customers, is an example like this. Yeah, we want to use AI in recruitment to select the best resumes for us. That will save time, for sure. It's not the best message to send for human resources, of course, but the question I always pop back is to say, what do you think the candidates are generating their resumes with? So yes, you'll be cutting out the middleman, but basically you just have 2 computers talking to each other and then deciding which one should artificially be selected as your future talents, which sort of depends on how good your data is in this case. Towards the end, everything's going to be written by AI anyway. And this is the first question you should then be asking when you've been tasked with implementing some sort of AI. That is, well, do you have a lot of non-biased, reflective, high-quality data to work with? Because if you don't, then you run into many of the fallacies that underlying AI. Because context really matters. The jokes that was funny in 1941, while they might have been funny in that point in time, both culture, the world, and the time has changed, the language as well, the meaning of the words. So you want to make sure that you have enough data, you want to make sure that it's reflective, and you want to make sure that you're not offending anyone with what comes out of it. And it requires quite a lot of data. Then the second point here is then, what are you trying to optimize? Because when you scratch a bit into removing this friction, it's typically friction within the HR admin side of things. Yes, we want to make it easier for us to support SuccessFactors. Well, if you do something to remove friction for the thousands of users that are using it every day, first of all, you get a better user adoption, and then you actually get a better business case for the system, which of course is interesting, but you're reducing thousands of hours of friction. So taking the example from before where you would cut down from 45 days of hiring to, let's say, a day. Well, if you have 5,000 hirings a year, that's much better than you can save a few hours going through resumes once every second week. So you also have to look at where does it make sense to remove friction. And the problem is that the people we're always asking is ourselves. We want to make it easier for ourselves. And for some odd reason, that always involves typing stuff into a terminal that we now call an AI agent for the good user experience. So a hint here is don't start with the AI. We can always go into how to do the AI, and I'm going to give a few hints on this as well. But if you want to remove friction from AI, make sure that how you get your data into the system is made easy. How to validate that you have the right data is made scalable and consistent, and make sure that you keep it that way. Because the idea that this is a one-off thing, now we collect all these data, well, data change and so does the context around it. So you need a way to continuously capture this. Otherwise, you won't be capturing trends. You'll have outdated training very, very soon. So one of the focus areas that you should be looking into once you have the data part in place is the latest crave on top of the hype, which is called the generative AI. So what we want to make sure of is that we had a party some 15, 17 years ago when everyone was talking about APIs. We want to API enable our systems so that we can automate them. Then back then it was, if you remember, RPAs, those horrible robotic things that had a high cost of maintenance. Well, now we have the idea that we can ask the AI to do it, and then it can act on top of the APIs instead. So it can interact with the system on our behalf. And where this becomes interesting is not when we have a specific AI in a specific system that can talk to that specific system only. It becomes interesting when you have an AI that can talk across systems in the system landscape, making decisions, dragging data in from ServiceNow, in from your controlling in S/4HANA, in from SuccessFactors, and based on these correlated data, make decisions on your behalf, because that's cutting away all the Excel sheets that you were doing before and all the incorrect calculations that you were doing inside them. And this has a potential for really changing things, with the warning that when you're asking an AI to do this in written language, which is somewhat become the standard, right? You have the same chance of misunderstanding as you have when people are talking to people. So when you see how many IT projects fail due to miscommunication or misinterpretation, well, now you're asking an AI with the same chance of misinterpretation, with direct access to your system to do automation on your behalf. Now it would just be executed. So instead of a long-running project where miscommunication just ends up in budget overruns, now it will be effective immediately with your miscommunication, right? So the thing to be interested in here, if you ask me, this is a bit beyond the, let's say, SAP specific part, is the model context protocol. This is a standard that's implemented or invented by Anthropic. The reason why that protocol is interesting is that it allows any AI agent that implements the model context protocol, which is sort of every one of them, of the famous ones like Gemini, OpenAI, and later this year also Joule as well, to be context aware of all your different systems and have cross-system support. So you can ask one AI agent and like Copilot, and it can go into all your different systems, find the data that it needs, and interact with the system, automating what you're trying to do. That, first of all, prevents you from being tied into a single AI. It also allows you to utilize the AI that you have yourself if you have one. And that, of course, goes back to the whole data part. But a lot of customers want to train their own AI, despite it costing a lot, because then your data is protected and then you utilize your own company data, right? Well, if you want to do this, then you want to make sure that it adheres to the model context protocol. Then on top of this, you can sort of control steer it. So I know this was a lot about hyper automation because that's where people today seem to think that they can remove the friction, right? But I want to sum things up a bit here. And I've left you a couple of key points, and then I'll dive in. So I'll also allow a bit of questions here. Don't forget the best practice. It's a good starting point. The reason why it's implemented into SuccessFactors as a best practice is because a lot of customers have used it. So it's a chance to reevaluate what you're doing, if that could be done in a better way. No one wakes up one morning deciding to go against best practice. They typically have a reason for this, and you should allow this. You should allow to dare to go beyond when you have a business case, which will also be the challenge when it comes to AI, of course, as mentioned. But start with the best practice and then only go beyond when you have a proper business case. And then nothing starts with the toolbox. It starts with you actually understanding the business needs and the personas you have working in your company. So try to map that out. It's also a very nice things to look at when you're making decisions in HR. So I remember I had a project once where we drew off a big picture of Ruth, the master data admin. She was very ruthless, and there was a lot of decisions that were then decided in the project when people looked and say, would Ruth really do this, or would she really want that mobile experience running payroll on? And then it was much more relevant what you tried to build. It wasn't as theoretical as you typically start. So finding out those personas so you can map and you can evaluate your decisions up against them. So what you're building is much more relevant. And then you need to think outside the modules. The reason why we have different modules is because it's a large, complex systems. And the more systems we have, the more complex it becomes and the more islands we create. But for the end user, if you want to remove friction, then you don't want them to logging into 7 different systems or to log into a single system. And then every time you see a different module, all the wording, all the concept change. So you need to think about the business process. The only reason why we have the whole concept of ERP is to have process that goes across. That's how you should design your user experience, whether it's AI supported or whether it's just a new visualization. Tap into all the different modules and all the different systems when you found that part of the business process that you want to support and deliver it in one single go to the user. That's one of the best things, and don't let them log into all the systems. Single sign-on is perhaps the single best thing you can do to remove friction. And despite being a CTO, this might interest you, it's never about the technology. It's just a toolbox. What you get with BTP is a huge toolbox, and it's an ever-evolving toolbox, but it's still a toolbox. It's how you use it, and it's how you use it in relation to your users that becomes the interesting part here. This is where the crux of it all is. You continuously have new options and you can utilize them, but you need to understand where the low-hanging fruits are in your systems and your business as well. And yes, you'll probably end up doing some AI because that's what everyone wants to at least have checked off on their box. But make sure that you start with ensuring that you have the right reflective, non-biased data to base it on. This is a key aspect. You have to understand the data you have, not just the retention rules or whether you can do reporting, but what are they actually showing? What part of the process are you covering? What answers can you actually answer with the data that you have? And then don't lock them into a single system, because the business process goes across systems and across modules. So if you want to do AI and have impact with it, so should the AI be allowed to do this. And you've all had this, that suddenly a new legal requirement comes up and we have to create a new report that gives us the data so that we can answer this. The equal pay is a great example, right? Let's create a report that gives us the answer. Well, the report is just the start, it's not a process. It provides some data on who's affected, who's off, who's missing, what's inconsistent. What you need to think about is, what is then the next step? What should you do with it? What is the interaction that follows this? What would you do if there's a pay gap, if there's an issue in equal opportunity, if you're hiring the wrong people, if your managers are not performing? What should be the corrective step? Because this is the part that you can then start to automate. So instead of you looking at the data and then deciding ad hoc what you should be doing, you need to decide what should happen in this case. Because once you've had that documented and you understood, then you can start the whole automation process. And last but not least, I know this is a bit provocative, but it's also trying to make you reflect on how you run things. A lot, when they've been running SuccessFactors for a while, go into an admin and let's keep this maintenance lights on mode. If you're not creating an impact with your system, then it's you that's going to be the automated part, right? If what you find is continuously business impact by supporting the business that you then understand and go away from the ad hoc way of doing it, then you'll still have something to do once the revolution hits. And I think that leaves a bit of time for questions.
Thank you, Henrik. It was very informative, very insightful. And yes, we do have a few questions. I'm going to go straight into them. And if I get the first question, is just coming up. This is a good question, actually. It's about integrations. It's from Sana. About the integrations, we have our own iPaaS and not BTP in use on SuccessFactors. What would be the benefits to take also the BTP into use? Would the integrations be somehow easier?
Yeah.
Thanks for the question, Sam.
Yes. Okay. So there are a lot of great integration platform as a service out there, apart from just the integration suite available on BTP. The most mature ones out there, of course, run stable, scalable, otherwise they wouldn't be there. And there is always a great benefit to not having too many integrations platform, because the real cost of an integration is rarely the development or initial test. It's the upgrading, it's the continuously test and validation that once you move or change the systems, there will all be a system at each end, that is maintained and that you have proper monitoring and interaction when something goes wrong, or when you change the data model. So for all the big players, you probably get a good result on staying on fairly few or single consolidated integration platforms. However, where you get a benefit from choosing the integration suite is through the prepackaged content that's available there. So of course, when you're integrating SAP to SAP, SAP very much knows about the different endpoints and how they should be mapped, like the effective dating issue I mentioned earlier. And they actually deliver some prepackaged content that provides this out of the box, that doesn't require a lot of adaptation, and you can get continuously updated on. So you take a lot of the cost out of the development part when there's prepackaged content available. There's also a lot of prepackaged content available from partners. So if you find something from this side, of course, then you'll cut down the costs or the time to delivery. But if that means that you'll get another integration platform into play and you have to monitor and adapt this, then of course that's an evaluation you need to make on the TCO versus the initial cost. Hope that answered the question somewhat. And John, I think you're talking with a muted phone.
Thanks, Henrik. Another good question from Louise. Louise is just wondering, When should you build an extension on BTP instead of customizing SAP SuccessFactors, in your opinion? Thanks, Louise.
So I always prefer customizing when you are customizing it in a way where you're not misusing the intent of the system. So misusing how fields are supposed to be used, because we can also use it for this, always ends up as a bad decision down the road when suddenly SAP starts using it for what it was intended to do. And then you sort of break it. When you do an extension, it's a clean cut. You don't really change SuccessFactors. You run side by side on this, so it will never be able to interfere with the cost maintenance part of SuccessFactors. You cannot change the underside or the belly or the delivered applications from SAP SuccessFactors. That's fully mentioned by SAP, and if they fit your purpose, then stick to them as much as you can. But when you run into something where they cause friction and you can count a business case for if you could cut this in half, or you could get so much more user adoption doing this, then doing an extension is actually fairly easy to do because the tools around it are so mature that do this just to get the user adoption. Then you can always deprecate it if at some point in the future SAP goes into innovation mode and actually bridges this and put that in, then deprecate it as long as you can remap the data. So it doesn't take long to create a prototype on how things will look. We typically say between 1 or 2 weeks, then you have a prototype on how it will look. So validate the need before you go into a deep investment into something, and don't validate it in the HR project. Go talk to the end user and showcase it to them. Then you agree on the end result before you dive or invest deep into something. Do some validated work always.
Right. Thanks for the question, Louise. Thank you, Henrik. I'll just take a couple of more. I am mindful of the time. And this is another question, and this one is from Mikhail. Thanks for the question, Mikhail. Can you give some common extension scenarios? Henrik, could you provide?
Yeah, that's the good question you always get, right? The whole point about most extensions is that they're made because it didn't exist in SuccessFactors for a specific scenario, and they are for most cases customer specific. Like we've seen ways that people have different time-based succession planning that I've seen nowhere else, that they wanted that supported, right? That would make no business case somewhere else. There are, of course, scenarios where we see that again and again happening, like generating initials as part of the hiring process is a classical thing. We also see areas where customers don't like the user visualization, but they sort of like the business process, which is what PXMsoft did with the org chart and modeling, right? People wanted a more flexible approach to how you could remodel your organization, especially if you're doing regular updates, right? But at the same time, you want to stay within SuccessFactors. You want to utilize that data and that protection of data and that retention, so that you don't sit at Friday late night with a lot of Excel sheet and then upload your change of organization. So it very much depends on how specific and also what specific company you are. So if you run into a regulated industry, or whether you're in retail, or whether you're working in manufacturing production, where you have a lot of people on the factory floor, right? So the adoption of how the user experience should be and how you utilize an HR system varies very highly. And SuccessFactors only have this baseline part. So great example of this is recruitment, right? Recruitment is mostly white collar specialized recruitment. If you look at it from the outside, and it's not really meant for blue collars. They will probably come with the Smart Recruiters acquisition, right? So we've had a lot of customers that dive into how can we create something better for those that are on the factory floor or in the car or field workers. So you see a lot of those examples where you adapt it to a specific group where the current solution doesn't really fit how that industry works. But there are literally thousands of examples of this. So,
Right. Good. Actually, this is another very, very good question. And again, I think, Henrik, it's very much based around use cases. And this one is from Stinus. Thanks for the question, Stinus. Stinus is just wondering, I suppose when we look at reporting, Henrik, for HR reporting, I suppose specifically around data and analytics, if you were to look at a use case for using BTP around reporting analytics for SAP SuccessFactors, what would it be?
So it's typically split up between whether you want to do strategic reporting, which is somewhat in the area of SAP Analytics Cloud, or you want to utilize the embedded reporting. That's where most customers try to fit in. But if you take a look at the other way around and asking the individual user, where do you actually need the numbers? When are you extracting data into Excel and even trying to manipulate it? And then you'll find that there's a lot of other examples where a part of reporting is needed. I've always hated the concept of a BI system, because what it potentially means is that when you're in the middle of a business process and need to make a decision on whether to go left or right or approve, reject, or whatever, that you log into another system and then you dive into the data and you typically extract it and do some Excel work on top to end up with a number or an indicator bigger or larger than. Well, that's the sort of data you want to showcase right where you're making the decisions, either in the workflow, in the application. When you're doing calibration for 120 subjects, you want to make sure live that you're not taking all the men of one gender, putting up into the 5x5 and rejecting all the women. You want to see that data live, not as a report in your embedded, but as part of when you're conducting the business process. And that again starts with understanding what data is needed at which point during your decisions. Long answer, sorry, but I do hate BI systems with a passion.
And John, if you want, I can jump in on that as well.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, Nick. Yeah, absolutely.
Only because reporting and analytics and workforce planning is sort of my passion area within SuccessFactors. So first of all, yes, BTP and the Business Data Cloud have split off. They're two separate entities now. When we talk about reporting and analytics and planning, it sits under the Business Data Cloud, or BDC. Yes, we will continue to provide embedded reporting, as Henrik talked about, inside of SuccessFactors. That is stories, live transactional reporting on SAP SuccessFactors data. As I mentioned at the top of the hour, we're about to release our new analytics and planning application called People Intelligence, which is based upon BDC, BDC being the engine, People Intelligence being the dashboards, the metrics, the predictive capabilities, the AI that will include as part of that analytics offering. So we'll have a full stack approach, live reporting in SuccessFactors with stories, analytics and planning delivered through People Intelligence. So you'll hear more about this in the coming weeks as we get ready for SAP Connect. And we're certainly happy to have a conversation about where the future of People Intelligence will go.
Brilliant. On that note, and again, we're approaching the top of the hour very, very quickly. I'm going to hand it over to my two guest speakers. You know, if I could just ask them maybe for a quick summary. Mick, I'll start off with you. I'll give Henrik a break, let him catch his breath. But, you know, quick summary, Mick. BTP is here to say, I think it's fair to say it does offer tremendous value, but I'll give you the last minute before I hand it over to Henrik.
Yeah, I think here within the HR community, BTP is really growing quickly. I think HR owns the strategy in many cases for integrations and extensions, and increasingly has now the tools working with partners like Gavdi Group to be able to turn these concepts, these use cases into reality. So there's a wealth of technical detail obviously behind BTP, but first and foremost, we're seeing more HR leaders saying this is an opportunity for us to deliver packaged new to world innovation without disrupting the core systems or the core data sets. And it's something we can do ourselves. We don't necessarily need to go to IT to be able to support that. And once again, thank you for the partnership you've given to us over many, many years. And thanks for the expertise in this space.
Thank you, Mick. Thank you for your attendance. It's very much appreciated. Henrik, thank you so much. Yeah. Final thoughts?
I mean, I love working with BTP and love to work with SuccessFactors, but most of all, I love working with humans. And I think that's where you should start, to understand the end users that are involved here. And then we can always talk about the tools and how to enable them. But go talk to the end user and get them to love the systems and the processes.
Thank you so much. It's now top of the hour. A big thank you to both Henrik and Mick. I hope everyone today found it insightful. For me, it was definitely very informative. And I suppose on that note, this is the first in a series. You know, we look forward to collaborating a little bit further with both Mick and Henrik. I think just shown by the amount of people who registered and attended today, there is a massive interest in this. Hopefully we will follow this up with part 2 in the series. Might even get a customer on board. I know Henrik is working with quite a few customers at the moment, maybe get the customer opinion for the next session. But again, on behalf of everyone at Gavdi and SAP, thank you for taking the time. Hope you found value in it. I'm mindful there is a few questions that we haven't got around to answering, but we will endeavour to follow up with you. And as I said at the beginning, happy to share a recording and transcript of today's session. So on that note, just wishing everyone the best for the day, and we look forward to seeing you on the next session. Have a great day. Thank you.